Hey everyone. So welcome to our webinar featuring Religion News Association. I am Jack Jenkins, the national reporter at Religion News Service, where I cover the intersection of religion and politics. And today we're going to be talking about the key findings from the National Survey of Religious Leaders. It's a fascinating survey recently conducted and gathered by Mark Chaves over at Duke University. And you might be wondering who Mark is. Mark is the Ann River Scott Distinguished Professor of Sociology and a Professor of Religious Studies and Divinity at Duke University. He directs the National Congregation Study, a wide-ranging survey of a nationally representative sample of religious congregations, and the National Survey of Religious Leaders, a similarly wide-ranging and nationally representative survey of clergy. The NCS has been conducted four times, 1998, 2006, 2012, and 2018 to 2019. And the NSRL, so the National Survey of Religious Leaders, was conducted in 2019 to 2020. Professor Chaves is also the author of American Religion, Contemporary Trends, another book, Congregations in America, another book, Ordaining Women, Culture and Conflict in Religious Organizations, and many articles, mainly on the social organization of religion in the United States. And he has chaired the General Social Surveys Board of Overseers, and he has been president of the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion. So clearly, a fascinating person to talk about this fascinating study. Before I turn it over to Mark, I just want to remind you, as he discusses this survey, if you have questions, and we urge you to have questions, drop them in the Q&A that you can see at the bottom of your screen throughout the next 20 odd minutes while we're discussing this. Anything you have that piques your interest. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Mark.
Thanks so much, Jack. And thanks to the Religion News Association for hosting this. I'm very excited about it, and thanks to all of you for being there. The agenda for today, as Jack mentioned, is for me to share some key findings from the National Survey of Religious Leaders. And I'm just going to jump right in. There's way more findings from the survey than I'm going to highlight, but I'm going to give you a tease of some of the key findings, so that you know what's out there and available. All of this is available. I'll show you how to get access to it at the end. The National Survey of Religious Leaders. Oh, there we go. It's a survey of a national representative sample of clergy who serve congregations. These are the clergy who serve the congregations that participated in the fourth wave of the National Congregation Study. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the methods. You can ask me about that if you want, but I'm hoping you'll take my word for it that this is a high quality representative sample of religious leaders who serve congregations across the religious spectrum. There are 1,600 leaders who responded, 890 of whom are the primary leaders of their congregations. The others are various kinds of assistants and associates and other kinds of leaders. The results I'm going to focus on today all concern the primary leaders, so the main leaders of congregations. There's a 70% cooperation rate. We gather the data in 2019 and 2020, mainly through self-administered online surveys. So as you can see, the data are not super new, but this report that we just released is what's new, putting it all together. I'll say more about that as we go on. The funder of this is the John Templeton Foundation. The NSRL didn't focus on any one subject. We had a bunch of different subjects. We asked questions about clergy work settings, careers and jobs, their health and well-being, their own theological and religious beliefs and practices. We asked about their practices and views about mental illness, about their attitudes about end-of-life care, their views on science in general and some specific scientific issues, some politics, what sources of information they turn to, the kinds of organizations they collaborate with outside their congregation. We ask them what speakers they most want to hear about, and we ask them about challenges, the main challenges they face in their work. That's the kind of big picture. I'm not going to talk about all this today. I'm just going to give you some of it. I'm going to start with job satisfaction and well-being because I think there's some interesting things here. Um, the punchline here is that most primary leaders, clergy, are happy and satisfied with your work. As you can see, 97% say they're at least moderately satisfied with the work. Very high percentages, no matter how we ask. Feel satisfied with life, feel happy. Very few, only about 10%, fairly often or very often consider leaving their work. I think this is interesting because I think there is a narrative out there and has been about how stressed out clergy are and how unhappy they are in general. And we should not believe that. The clergy generally are a very satisfied and happy group. This is the one, most of what we ask about, I don't think very good reason to think that it's changed since the pandemic. These data are obviously from right before the pandemic. This is one where it would be plausible to wonder, did this change with the pandemic? And I think we know that the answer to that is no, it hasn't changed. We know that because Scott Thumma at Hartford Seminary has done some surveys of clergy since the pandemic and finds the same thing, comparably high levels of job satisfaction, life satisfaction, comparable to or higher than the levels in the general population. So narratives about clergy being particularly unhappy, it should be taken with a grain of salt. We might wonder, well, why are those narratives out there? I don't think this is because they used to be unhappy and now they're happier. I don't think this is about change over time. I think it's partly because of this. There is a real difference. Mainline Protestant leaders stand out for being less happy and satisfied in general than other clergy, other Christian leaders. Oh, I should say the National Assembly of Religious Leaders has leaders from across the religious spectrum, including rabbis and imams and leaders of Hindu and Buddhist temples. But what I'm focusing on, those when you see percentages that are all leaders, those are included, but there's not enough people in those other groups to isolate out reliably. So when I compare religious groups, I'm only going to compare various Christian groups to each other. So as you can see, mainline are just as likely as everybody else. Basically, all of them are very moderately satisfied with their work. But the other questions that we ask, they are noticeably less likely to say they're the highest level of happiness or satisfaction. They are noticeably more likely to say that they consider leaving religious work. This is partly why there's narrative out there, is because a lot of the research has focused on mainline Protestants who are less happy. So that's partly, and just more generally, I think there's stories here about why is this. And the short answer is I don't know why it is. We've tried to investigate, but none of the obvious hypotheses that have occurred to us and that might occur to you are explain it. So, for example, you might think, well, the mainline Protestant, there's way more females among mainline Protestant leaders. Maybe women are less happy, but that doesn't explain it. When you just look at the men, you see the same differences. You might think, well, they're more likely to be in declining churches, which is not exactly true. But even if it was true, that doesn't explain it. If you just look at people whose churches are stable or growing, you see the same difference. There's some other things, ways that mainline stand out as different from other Christian clergy that I'll show you in a minute that you might think are explain it, but nothing we've looked at fully explains it. That's the short answer. There's no one thing that explains it. I think that's probably clear. There's got to be a complex combination of things that we haven't figured out yet. So there's stuff here to dig into and to try to understand better. We asked clergy about their theological beliefs. There's another place that mainline stand out. Um, Basically, traditional Orthodox Christian beliefs. Do they know God exists? Do they believe in Jesus' bodily resurrection? And so on. As you can see, the vast majority of all the groups, evangelical, Black, Protestant, Catholic, and mainline, well, except for the mainline, endorse these beliefs. The mainline stands out as less likely to say these things. It wasn't surprising to me that they are lower on these. In a way, that's what it means to be a liberal Protestant, is to have a less literalistic interpretation of all this stuff. But it did surprise me the magnitude of these differences. They are just less likely to hold these traditional beliefs in the most strongest way. Um, this does not explain why they're less happy. We've looked at that. Um, Another thing we looked at is politics. We asked about various aspects of their politics. You won't be surprised, or maybe you will, but there is over 80% of evangelical Protestant clergy identify as Republican. Um, uh, uh, very few in the, only about a third of Catholics and about a fifth of mainline, and fewer than 10% of Black Protestant identify as Republican. Maybe this isn't that surprising, but it's a pretty stark contrast of the political polarization within American Christianity. We asked about their political activities. Um, and there's obviously a lot here that I'm not going to go through. Let me just highlight a few things. We asked them a series of activities that they did or not in their capacity as leaders, not just in their personal individual life. Um, One thing to notice is these top few are what the political scientists call cue giving, taking a public stand, urging voters, does not even really that, but publicly praying about an issue. And as you can see, that's very common among clergy. The majorities of clergy do political cue giving in some way. The ones from here down are more kind of activist kind of things, organize a political group, lobbying, protesting, again, in their capacity as leaders. Many fewer, the percentages are much lower on activism. One thing that stands out here is that the evangelical Protestants, they do not do less cue giving than anybody else. They do less direct action. As you can see, that purple line is often uh, uh, less. There's way more evangelical clergy out there than there are mainline clergy, mainline Protestant clergy, for example. So the smaller percentages can still mean a lot more action in a politically active clergy in an absolute sense, but the rates are lower. We asked, interestingly, I think, have you ever endorsed a candidate, and would you if they're, of course, not supposed to do this for tax reasons. 9% overall say they have. Another quarter say they would. Not another quarter. A quarter say they either have or would. What stands out here is that Black clergy are way more likely than anybody else to have endorsed a candidate and say they would. Which yeah, I think is interesting and reminiscent a little bit. Some of you might remember the Bush administration's faith-based initiative, and which of course was an effort to engage evangelical clergy in more than their churches and social services. But it turned out that the clergy and congregations that were most interested in government funding for social services were Black churches and actually liberal churches. So there's an irony there, because not so much this Trump administration, the first Trump administration, there was talk about opening up loosening the tax rules about this. But if that were to happen, it would mainly empower Black churches would be on the front of the line of who would be empowered by that. Okay, we also asked what issues they address when they're politically active, a set of issues. I don't think there's anything hugely surprising here, but there's interesting details. The Groups, different clergy and different religious groups do focus on different issues. On the issue of abortion, it's mainly Catholic and evangelicals who are active. On LGBTQ issues, it's mainly evangelical Protestants and mainline Protestants who are active, on different sides, of course. On immigration, it's mainly Catholic and mainline who are active. So there's different kind of coalitions of clergy who are active on different issues. There's other things to say here, but I'll just leave that there. All this is available in the report that's online that I'll show you at the end, by the way. So don't worry if you're not getting the details. Last point on politics, we asked clergy to compare themselves politically to the people in their churches. We asked, when you think about politically compared to most people in your congregation, are you much more liberal? Some are more liberal, about the same. Some are much more conservative. There's several interesting things here. As you can see, evangelical and Black Protestants are very well matched generally politically with their congregations. When they're not as perfectly matched, they're about equally likely to be more conservative than as more liberal. Catholics are a little less well matched and a little more likely to be more liberal. But what really stands out here again is the main line. Only a third of them say that they're about the same politically as a church. Half of them are more liberal, and a fifth of them say they're much more liberal than their churches. This mismatch, by the way, also does not explain why mainline clergy are less happy in their churches. It might be part of an explanation. It doesn't explain it by itself. This is long-standing. Social scientists have been kind of tracking this at least since the civil rights movement in the 1960s, and this has been showing up some version of this. In our current context, it is partly explains why there's not much of a religious left, because these folks, the evangelical Protestants and Black Protestants, can mobilize their churches because they agree with them on things, or the people agree with their clergy. The mainline are not so in a position to mobilize their people. Sometimes they are, of course, and there is some of it, of course, but this is partly why there's less of it. Okay, we're going to another set, sort of related to politics. We asked their views about climate change. I like to show this result because the politicization of this issue is what stands out here. Only a fifth of evangelical Protestants accept the scientific consensus on climate change, that the climate is changing and human action is a major cause of it. They mainly do accept that the climate is changing, but they're more likely to say human action is only a minor part of it, not a major part of it, compared to 3/4 or so of everybody else. This is interesting for a lot of reasons. One reason is this is a different pattern than what you see when we ask about other scientific issues, the more kind of traditional religion, science, conflict issues like age of the earth and creation of the earth and human evolution, where Black Protestants and evangelical Protestants in similar numbers reject scientific consensus on those issues. So the contrast is between evangelical and Black clergy on the one hand, Catholics and mainline Protestants on the other. But this one is different. Black clergy line up with other people on this, which I think really shows it's also just kind of theologically, it's kind of hard, I think, to think of why this would be, unlike Age of the Earth or human evolution, where you can, draw on biblically literalism to connect to that, but how do you do that with climate change? It's hard to see the theological justification for this, and yet there's this gigantic difference. That seems clearly about the politicization of this issue that affects clergy like everybody else. Okay, switching subjects. We asked about their views about mental illness, and the reason we did this is because as everybody knows, clergy are often on the front lines of helping people or responding to people who are grappling with mental health issues. 42% were approached in our sample in the last year, at least once or twice for help with a mental health issue. When you do surveys of individuals and ask who do you go to for help, about a quarter of people who seek help for mental health issues seek it from clergy. We know clergy are on the front lines here. And before this survey, nobody knew what they were telling people. Was it a good thing that clergy were being approached about this, or not a good thing? But now we know. So we asked both. The way we assessed this is we gave people a vignette that described a seriously depressed woman in their church, and we said, okay, what do you think's causing this? Gave them a bunch of options, and we said, what would you encourage this person to do? I won't go into all the details, but the uh, uh, crux of the matter here is that when you separate out both with the causes and with the what would you encourage them to do, and you say, how many said, okay, this has just got medical reasons or social reasons, nothing else. This is just about religion. This is caused by a lack of faith or demons or something. Um, but the people, we allowed them to combine it. They weren't mutually exclusive. You could say one or the other. And let's just focus on whether they would encourage a mental health professional, whether encourage them to see a mental health professional or religious activity. Come to church more, pray more, work on your faith. And similarly, we asked, would they prescribe medicine also in conjunction with these other things? And as you can see, only about 10% of clergy would encourage only religious activity when confronted with someone dealing with depression. The three-quarters of them would combine medical and religious. So they're not rejecting religious responses to depression, but they're combining it with medical things. Only about 15% say, yeah, medical response only. Similarly, with causes, there's things to say about that, but I won't go into that. This is almost entirely the most conservative Protestant clergy were saying this, but even among them, it's only about 15% of even evangelical and Pentecostal clergy who would say only pray, only come to church more, only work on your faith. So even among them, it's like 1% of Catholic priests and mainline clergy who would say that. So we consider this kind of good news for the world that generally speaking, the vast majority of clergy can be seen as allies by mental health professionals in their efforts to help people with. So we thought this was an important finding. Although sometimes when I present this and they say, but it's not good news, it's bad news. There's still 10% out there who are saying, no, don't take your medicine, don't go see a doctor. But I found that surprising. I would have expected those numbers to be higher. Okay. We also another arena, of course, in which clergy are very active in talking with people and ministering to people is at end of life moments or near the end of life and their care and decisions. So we asked their attitudes about in that situation. Like the general population, we asked both, do they essentially support palliative care, allowing someone to die by withholding treatments? And so there's support for assisted physician-assisted suicide. Like the general population, clergy are much more supportive of palliative care, withholding treatments than they are with supportive of physician-assisted. Or again, another arena in which mainline clergy stand out. Almost half of them support physician-assisted suicide much more than everybody else. We also asked, similar to the depression question, what would they encourage somebody to do who was near death? Would they encourage someone who was, I think we said, suffering from cancer was near death? Would they encourage them to hope for a miracle cure? Would they encourage them to stop aggressive medical treatment and pursue palliative care? And as you can see, evangelical and black clergy are way more likely to encourage a miracle cure than they are to encourage palliative care. And the opposite is true for Catholic priests and mainline Protestants. And on this one, it's interesting that Catholic priests stand out. As the only group where more than half say they're likely to encourage palliative care. There were some stories during Pope Francis's illness about Catholic teaching on this subject, and the crux of those stories was accurate, which is that Catholic uh, teaching is not particularly opposed to palliative care. Um, the last thing I'm going to show you in detail is, kind of a little more on the fun side, is we ask people if cost was no object, who would you want to invite to speak to your congregation? And this is what people said. There are differences. The top vote getter for Catholics was Bishop Barron, who's Bishop of a diocese in Minnesota. You probably know, all of you probably know who all these people are. He is a well-known, he runs an organization called Word on Fire, which is a media ministry organization. He's a popular author, speaker. Franklin Graham was the top person among evangelicals. The Obamas, either Barack or Michelle or some or both, were the top choices among both black clergy and mainline Protestants. And the Pope came in second behind Bishop Barron for Catholics. Um, Okay, so that's where I'm going to stop in terms of the giving you some of the detailed results. Let me remind you, we have results on a lot of different other subjects. We know about the demographics of clergy. Well, we asked questions about their work settings, their careers, their jobs. We asked about their own physical and mental health. We asked some questions about science other than the ones I showed you about climate change and depression. We asked them about their main sources of information. We asked them about collaborations that they worked with other organizations. We asked about their main challenges, and the main thing I want to leave you with. Well, we have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion, but I do want to show you our website quickly. Um, because let me do that. I have to stop sharing and then start sharing again, I think, to go to here. Okay, I'm going to assume that you can see that, but I actually want to. This is the report. Uh, um, but I want to just show you the website quick. Here we go. It's very easy to find. Yeah, here's our website, and it's very easy to get to this report that we just released. But my reason for doing this is obviously it would be great if you want to write stories about that focus on any of these results. There's lots of stories I think that could be written about these results, but even if without that as a more medium to long term resource, I just want to alert you to the fact that this is there. These results are there. The report has at the back of it a very long appendix that has numbers about from basically every question we asked about, broken down by the primary leaders, secondary leaders, the all leaders. This is all there. It's very likely that if you're writing any story at all that have to do with religious leaders, clergy in the United States, it's very likely that there's some numbers here that could provide some useful context for your story if you're looking for just some national authoritative context. In the absence of any stories directly about NSRL results. My main agenda for doing this webinar and this outreach is to alert you to this resource that's there for you in the medium to long term. And you can also email me if you don't find something that is what you want. You should feel free to reach out to me to ask if I have some numbers that could help you. That's also true for the National Congregation Study as well. And I'm just going to stop there and give it back to Jack, who I think is monitoring questions.
Indeed. First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. Fascinating, as always. While I'm about to ask you a couple questions, just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A below. Before, as people might drop some questions in there, I did want to ask one kind of open-ended one to you, Mark. And I should let people know that I had the privilege of being able to see the survey a couple of times over the last month or so. And so I have some thoughts have been percolating. But I did want to ask, one of the things that we know to be the case is that, with the rise of the religiously unaffiliated, people who no longer affiliate with religion, a lot of those folks trend younger than older, right? And so I'm curious how age came up in this survey, both the age of clergy and potentially the impact of their aging congregations. And I wanted to ask if there were any specific findings or details that kind of leapt out at you as evidence either of aging clergy or aging congregations, and how that would impact, how the experience of these clergy.
Yes, we know the age of the clergy, and uh, I'm going to try to find here we go. On this subject, we also have an earlier comparison point. We also tracked this in the National Congregation Study, by the way, so we know this also that in 2001 there was a similar high quality national survey of clergy done by Jack Carroll here at Duke. So that's where these 2001 numbers come from. And here you can see the median age of clergy between 2001 and 2019 and 20. And yes, the clergy are getting older, and they're getting older faster than the general population. From about their median age in 2001 was 52. Their median age now is 59. As you can see, that is happening across the religious groups. That's not peculiar to any particular Christian group. Yes, so it's true. It's also true that the people are getting older, as you mentioned. We know this from just survey research of people. We also know it from the National Congregation Study, because we ask about the average age of people in the congregation, and church-going population is also aging faster than the general population. It's a kind of direct consequence, of course, of what's true among just the general population and people, that the main kind of demographic driver of declining religiosity is young people being less religious than older people, and that's showing up here. And it's also true for clergy. The other thing that's happening is fewer and fewer 22-year-olds being want to be clergy, and so that is pushing the average age higher. I think I have kind of related to that is uh, second jobs. I was surprised by this. Two-thirds of all clergy are doing this as a second career.
Wow.
That does vary quite a lot across religious groups. Only about a third of priests, but even a third of priests, and it's very common among black clergy. So that's obviously part of the story also of the aging clergy. Although I'm not sure this has been true for a while. So yeah, so that's yes, clergy are aging, as is the church-going population.
Fascinating. Next up, we're hearing from some folks in the chat. One is about kind of the racial breakdown of these different clergy members. The questioner is asking specifically what percentage of evangelical clergy or Hispanic and or Latino, what percent are Asian American. I didn't know if you had that. Oh, there we go. So I'm just
I
going to turn it over
do.
to you.
Yes. So we asked about their racial and ethnic identities. Um, and the main story, so here's the evangelicals. The main story here, of course, here's Black Protestants, virtually all uh, uh, of the leaders of predominantly Black churches are themselves Black. That's what this is about. Uh, the main story here is that the percentage of there's a substantial Hispanic population only among Catholics, among Christians. The both mainline and evangelical are about 5%. Again, what this is saying is um, this is the percent of so for example, this is the percent of evangelical congregations that are led by Hispanics, and similarly for mainline. This has increased over time. But all in the increase, I don't remember if I have I don't think I have a graph on the increase over time. But the increase in Hispanic representation among clergy is almost entirely among Catholics. That's the story here. It remains very small among Protestants, both evangelical and mainline.
Got it. And this next question might have a quick answer, but I am also kind of curious about what it implies. A questioner is asking whether any Quaker leaders were included in the study, given a different understanding of clergy there. I'm curious too, how if there was any methodology in terms of how these different groups were categorized. Some of them might seem obvious, whether they're mainline Protestant or evangelical, for instance. But I was curious if there was kind of a process used to delineate that and where you would put Quakers in that context.
Yeah. So the general question for the second question was just how we made these distinctions. Yeah. This is the kind of the standard based on the denomination of their congregation. So this isn't directly about their own theological positions or background. This is about is the congregation they're serving associated with uh, a evangelical denomination or a Catholic Church, obviously, or predominantly black Protestant or mainline. That's what it is. It's about the denominational affiliation of the congregation. Um, on the Quaker question, more general, I don't know. So let me say we've struggled with the terminology. I've been using the word clergy, but this is the National Survey of Religious Leaders. So what the sample literally is the leader of a congregation, and it not necessarily a clergy person. So if there was Mormons are the kind of most obvious example of this, who don't have ordained clergy, but they do have leaders of congregations. Um, and so we would try to get the leader of the ward as the sample. If there was a congregation, maybe like a Quaker gathering that didn't have, we would try to identify a lay leader. If there was someone who could be identified as the some kind of leader of that. This is often true also in Hindu and Buddhist temples, that there wouldn't be a single the religious leadership might really be the lay board who's running things, and there's maybe a president of the. So I don't know offhand if there are there's certainly Quaker gatherings in the National Congregation Study. I don't recall offhand if there are Quaker leaders in this, but that's how we would handle that. We would do our best to try to identify a leader, whether or not that person is a clergy person, whether or not that person is ordained. The vast majority of congregations, it's very easy to identify the leaders, but sometimes it's really not, and that's and just in general. By the way, we can't. There's just not enough. people, the sample's just not big enough to look at specific denominations of people, except for Catholics in the within any of these groups.
And tied to that, another questioner, just because it's tied to this, was asking about Pentecostals and whether they would have been classified under evangelical and whether there was a
Yes,
survey at all. I'm
yes.
assuming
I've
the survey.
classified
Okay.
Pentecostals under evangelicals. Mormons too, by the way. I put the Mormons in the among evangelicals because you got to make judgments about culturally and so on. Yes. I mean, with a bigger sample, obviously it would be good to make finer distinctions, but yes, that is what I did.
Now, another questioner points out something I think might have a couple different answers. They say you've shared that a fair amount of clergy are involved with more than one congregation. Do you find any other data that points to a sort of a clergy shortage in various traditions, as it were?
Um, Not here because I'm just looking for the where was I? Um, this is we started with a survey of congregate with a sample of congregations, and so yeah, I'm sorry, I'm distracted because yeah, here's what the person was talking about. Uh, because we started with a survey of congregations, everybody in our sample is in a congregation. And so we don't, not in these data, we don't have a way to address clergy shortage issues. I will say that of these three features of their position or career position, are they in a second career? Are they bivocational, meaning they currently have a job outside of a congregation? Or are they serving more than one congregation? This is the one that has increased since 2001. These not so much, kind of interestingly. People usually think the bivocational has increased, but we don't see it. We do see an increase here. And that I think is because both in Catholicism and in Protestantism, you see more of yoking of churches and congregations and parishes joining and having just one priest to serve more than one. There is it does look like they're not huge. It does look like there's an increase in the percentage of congregation of clergy who are serving more than one congregation.
Got it. Another questioner asks a very specific question that I think might also lead to another one. They ask, is there a chart showing response rates by U.S. regions? And I'm also curious, attached to that, if you have regional breakdowns at all.
Yeah. Um, so there's not a chart in this slide deck that does it. I will say we put a lot of effort into, we have a 70% overall response rate. We put a lot of effort into assessing bias, non-response bias. And mainly what that means is looking to see, are there differences in response rate across various demographic groups? And we mainly looked at, are there differences across religious groups? And I'll say the response rate was slightly lower among evangelicals than among others. And so that's corrected with weights. Um, um, I don't think there are different, I don't recall, but I don't think we didn't see evidence of bias, meaning different response rates across different demographic groups, however we looked at it. Again, with the exception of the among evangelicals, that slight difference that we used weights to correct for. So there are not. No, I don't think there are big response rate differences across regions. We do know the region. We can. I don't have any graphs here that break down by region. Um, it's tricky to do that in a simple way because region is so correlated with religious group. So if I showed you a regional graph and the South stood out, well, that would mainly be because that's it's mainly evangelical Protestant and Black Protestant, and the Northeast would stand out in some ways. But is that because it's about the Northeast, or it's because it's way more Catholic? Similarly with urban rural, there. So one could do all those breakdowns. They are um, in the data, and if I won't take the time, but I'm sure in that long appendix in the report, we just give the regional breakdown. I hope we do. I can't recall, to tell you the truth, but we certainly have it. But again, to really get into it, you'd have to be able to try to sort out, if you saw a regional difference, is it just because it's different religious group composition in one region rather than another?
Got it. Now, one another questioner asks, did you ask clergy whether they had been involved in any of the multiple clergy revitalization or coaching projects that have been going around the country?
Mm,
And if so, were those helpful? I know there's a lot of questions where it's like, oh, that might be good for the next survey, but I'm curious
yeah.
if you did run into that.
We didn't ask. Yeah, I just made a note of that because yeah, I hope there'll be a second wave of the NSRL. And I'll put that on the list of things to ask about. Obviously, the hardest thing in doing a survey is deciding, of all the many things you'd like to ask about, what would you like to ask about? What do you have time to ask about before people, get mad at you? And so we just didn't ask about that.
And tied to that, there was somebody who was asking about Catholic data in particular. Obviously, we're in the mid conclave fervor, and they were saying, on the Catholic data, did you break down by clergy level, by that parish priest versus bishop
Ah,
versus archbishop kind of
I
stuff?
don't have anything here. We asked, so everybody's in a congregation. Because that's the definition of the sample. We can distinguish between the primary leader, so the pastor, I guess, you'd say, of a Catholic parish, um, compared to other priests. We can make that distinction. And we also asked if they're in a religious order. So we could distinguish between priests who are in orders versus not. I have not done any of those comparisons. If the it's not just the results are public and the reports public and all that. The data are also public, by the way. So one can download the data and do those comparisons for yourself, if you were so inclined. But yeah, that is doable with these data, at least in those two ways: primary leader versus other leaders. You could compare and order priests and orders versus regular. You could do that. I haven't.
Got it. Now, as a religion and politics reporter, I would be remiss if I didn't ask a little bit about politics. You mentioned in that climate change slide that you felt that the clear impact here of the politicization of this issue in terms of how differently evangelical leaders responded compared to other clergy. I'm curious if you saw other, to your eye, clear impacts of the political realm on the experience, lives, dispositions of these clergy and how they interact with their congregations. I'm just curious where you saw that touch most clearly in your data.
I would say it's most clear in the issues that they said they addressed. Let me go back to that slide. The issues. I think this is where it's most clear. This two-thirds on immigrate. So remember, this is 2019, 2020. In the National Congregation Study, which had been done in 20, uh, uh, oh wait, it was 2012, and then again in 2018, 19, where we asked similar kinds of questions about the congregation. What issues was the congregation involved with? The one thing that we saw increase between 2012 and 2018, so 2 years into the first Trump administration, was liberal churches being involved on immigration issues and immigration mobilization, which people will recall. There was a lot of mobilization around immigration. There is now too, I guess. So I wouldn't be surprised if we did this survey now that you'd see an increase there among these. So that I would say this is where you're seeing the uh, because clergy they are responding to the issues of the day. Some of these are long-standing thing. Are you focused on economic issues, broadly speaking, hunger or poverty, broadly speaking? But others are the issue of the day. race relations. We specifically asked about police community relations because again, this was 2019 and 2020. And maybe I was a little surprised by that. It was only black churches, only black clergy who in big numbers said political community relations. So yeah, I'd say the general answer to is that this is where you see the responsiveness to, and especially when you look over time, where you see the responsiveness to the issues of the day.
Got it. And I did want to ask about your mental health slides as well. Just that, to your knowledge, does the rate of clergy taking proactive steps to educate themselves about mental health, does that mirror similar trends in the general public, or do you think it's more distinctive to these leaders?
Um, I don't think I know the answer to that question. Let me show you because I don't think I showed what literally you're referring to, which is uh, yeah. We asked,
Yeah.
I didn't show this in the main presentation. We asked, what have you done um, in the last year to address mental health in your congregation? And three-quarters said that they
Wow.
sought out resources to learn more about mental illness. Half said they led a prayer or healing service. Half said they preached a sermon. A quarter said they led a class. So yeah, those seem like, in an absolute sense, kind of big numbers. I kind of agree with you. Um, and so there is, and we know there's kind of something of a movement out there to for educate clergy and get them to address these issues more and be more cognizant of it. I don't know how these numbers would compare if you ask them in the to the general. That's a good question. But yeah, they're kind of impressively big, I think, as just in themselves.
And I know, lastly, and I understand I'm asking a sociologist to project and speculate, and I apologize for that. But I am curious for you, reading this moment, a few years removed from the initial survey. If you were to, be able to do this again, are there certain questions, given recent information, post-pandemic, stuff like that, that you would definitely want to throw in? Just because, or ones that you would definitely want to ask a second time because you definitely want to get another data point on. Just top line, top of your head, I'm curious how you would look forward regarding that.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, that's a good question. I should have pulled out my list of the questions that because I literally have a file, a list, but I haven't
Oh,
memorized it.
wow.
But on the what would I ask again, the kind of sort of sad answer of that is almost everything, just because the tracking the change over time. Um, is just so important. That's to me the that we've done the NCS 4 times, and its main value, in my view, of is the tracking the trends over time. And there's just no other way to do it than to ask the same questions repeatedly. In the NCS, I'll say we generally each time we do it, we repeat about 2/3 of the questions, and then try to add 1/3 of new content to uh, do it. On this for the new content, I would ask more health things because post-pandemic, it's vaccine questions. We would have been an obvious thing to ask a year later. What their views about vaccines. Um, it would be a new thing. I don't know what else comes to mind. I will say something. That I think is going to be interesting to track that we didn't ask about sexual orientation and kind of LGBTQ, um, but I don't think this is super well known that uh, the percentage of LGBTQ people in mainline liberal seminaries is increasing. Um, and maybe as high as 15 or 20% at the moment in some mainline
Wow.
liberal Protestant seminaries. And I think that is going to be something to watch in the composition of in the mainline in particular, going forward. Yeah, I might want to try to ask some questions now that we see this mainline less happy. Try to think of some questions that would enable us to try to get at that somehow more. When maybe some follow-ups to when they didn't say, yes, I'm extremely happy, to say, why are you saying that? What's the I think that would probably be good to focus on. Yeah, I wish I had my list of things, but those are a few things that just come to mind quickly.
Amazing. And admittedly, part of the reason I'm asking is this is such a rare survey to get this kind of data. Yeah, I've been religion reporter for a while now, and this is the first, one of the first times I've really come across something this rich.
Yeah, it's true.
So
Yeah.
it's really, really interesting and fascinating. I think we're up against time, but I really wanted to thank you, Mark, for taking the time to inform the public about such a fascinating survey and a fascinating group of data. Again, you should visit the websites that Mark listed to learn more. And I didn't know about the being able to manipulate the data yourself, so I might be doing that soon. But I wanted to thank everyone for coming to participate in this. For those of you that asked questions, really grateful that y'all took the time to throw your questions out there. And Mark, thank you again for taking the time to present to us.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks to Religion News Association and to Emily, who's behind the scenes and really helped pull this all together. Thank you, Emily. And yeah, same thing. Thanks to all the people who spent time with us today. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank y'all again. Take care.